Mr. Nick Morrow. He's a former LA County Sheriff. He was an expert in drug recognition, drug usage, drug sales. He's currently a private investigator. He testifies in criminal court. He's done dependency work in Tulare County. And hopefully we will be using him as an expert as well. So this is an informational for, he's going to give us some information on new drug laws, Prop 47, and how we can use him as an expert, and he will also be available for questions. So we will get started with Mr. Morrow.
So, like you said, I used to work for the Sheriff's Department. That was a long time ago. After leaving the Sheriff's Department, I went to law school. My back went out again, because everybody knows law school books are heavy. Second, third back surgery. I ended up not going back to law school, then started to do defense investigation work. My background with narcotics, under the influence, DUIs and that kind of stuff got me into doing expert witness work for the courts. And so I've been doing that since 2012. I've been on the county panel for a whole bunch of different things: possession for sales, drug trafficking, drug smuggling. I've dealt with Mexican cartels and Canadian cartels, which Canadian cartels are a lot more polite than Mexican ones. They actually, yeah, they are. I actually found out how they were making hidden compartments in one case, and they called me up to congratulate me on. They actually did. They called me up to tell me, "Hey, nobody's ever caught that before. Gee, thanks. Here's my number." But yeah, it's been interesting. And so a lot of the people I used to work around, I was the rabid narc that used to hide under your porch and wait for you to do something wrong, and that was my my persona back in the day. Now the guys I used to work with look at me like, "What the hell's wrong with you? You've fallen to the dark side," and all that kind of stuff. So, which is fine. It takes me about 20 minutes to get them back to the yin-yang conversation. But yeah, I was the guy with everybody wearing camouflage. I was the guy with the red hat on. So, of course, I was taking Santa Claus to jail. That was actually fun. So I've had a different. Yeah, that's so long ago. That's more LSD than the DEA seized in an entire year when nobody was looking for it. We kept finding it. So that just gives you a little bit of background on what I do. I've done over 350 cases for the Public Defender's Office, DUIs, possession for sale, that kind of stuff. I've testified up and down the state on different things. I mentioned the dependency case that I had up in Tulare County. Husband and wife, 2 kids living in the middle of nowhere out in the country. House was firebombed and drive-by shot up. Police get there, they find 12 marijuana plants, so of course they arrest mom and dad, and never prosecuted the drive-by shooting or firebombing, so it gives you kind of a weird deal. Children's Services are the ones that really drove that, based on 30-year-old information, so there's a lot of old information out there that people in positions of power or influence push forward. And so if what you know about drugs is more than 5 years old, you need to start reading again, because there's a lot of new stuff out there. And of course, with Prop 47, there's a lot of different approaches that's going on. I'm going to fly through a lot of this. This is no commentary on anybody's intellect. This presentation is made for middle school kids who know more about drugs than you ever will. So just so you know. So different drugs. We all think of the street drugs. We have a lot of prescription medications, a lot of research chemicals now. I'm a big fan of the classics: coke, heroin, PCP, that, because we know how it works in the human body. But now there's new substances out there. They call them research chemicals or rave party drugs, that kind of stuff. Not tested on human beings. While they're being tested on human beings real time. And so there's a lot of new stuff that's out there that you've never heard. 2CB, 2CE, 2CI. There's a whole bunch of N-bomb 51. It's crazy. What is illegal yesterday now becomes legal because some chemists tweaked the formula. So we're having a lot of problems with that. But that's one of the definitions, Merriam-Webster, any chemical substance. We all know that anything that will twist your mind in any way, shape, or form can be classified as a drug. These are easy ones. Pills and alcohol, those are our reference. Over-the-counter type stuff. Coricidin. You can see a lot of the cold medications. If you take the cold medication, it should dry up your sinuses and all that. If you take a whole box of cold medication, maybe 2 boxes, you can get high. people have figured this out. So there's people that are doing cough syrups and cold medications at a high level. This is why you can't buy Sudafed over the counter without giving your driver's license up. Any other drugs? The middle one is my preferred drug choice, as you can tell. It goes even crazier. This right here, somebody figured out that this is a cane toad, weighs about 1 kilogram, it's about that big. You'll see it in the South, you'll see it in Australia. This is a controlled substance in Australia. If you grab this toad and you make him mad, he'll secrete this white, pasty, yucky stuff from behind his eyes. And if you lick it, you can see colors. So this is how far out somebody had to invent this stuff, which is great. So it's out there. So my point is anything can be used to excess. Paracelsus, the dose makes the poison. So even too much of a good thing can kill you. If you drink 2 gallons of water in one sitting, you're dead. And so these are things that'll go in there. I love this guy's name. He's got everybody's Theophrastus bombastus is a very cool name. I'm going to probably make that a statement. But in practicality, you know, the more drug you use, the higher the effects are, that type of thing. So we're just talking about all drugs in general. Tolerance figures into it. The manner of use figures into it. That type of stuff. That's for the middle school kids. You know, why do people use drugs? They feel good. That's plain and simple. It's kind of teachers don't like me to say that, but it's in there. So where does it get us? It gets us into trouble. You know, you have the addicts. You have somebody who's ends up getting arrested. Of course, there's all the mental status of it. And then with all the images that we have that are coming out. We get a kind of a skewed image of what drug use is and what it isn't. And so you get some famous people that are, seem glamorous, seem successful, seem to have it all together. And they end up as a gigantic pile of brown bread coming out of a hotel dead. That's John Belushi. I gotta update that one. The seal of the president, I put that in there. Talk about gateway drugs. Our first 3 presidents used and grew marijuana. They called it Indian hemp, but they used and grew marijuana back in the day. Our last 3 presidents before Trump used marijuana and cocaine. So clearly, marijuana is a gateway to the White House. So we have to figure that out. With Trump in there, Trump claims to not drink coffee, not drink alcohol. We'll see what happens. Somebody's bound to come out of the woodwork, but let's just say that that's true. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't think he's the guy that put Sessions in the position he's in. Sessions scares the crap out of every drug policy reformer out there. So stay tuned, it's going to be entertaining. Typical DUI costs $25,000 or more. This is meant to scare kids who don't have $25,000. But this is my favorite picture of Nancy Reagan, Just Say No, and she is just completely vacant. That's what we call Prozac scare. You got it, so I grew up in a place where this was really important to me. And so if you don't know which one's deadly, you could be dead. So the more you know, the safer you are. That one's a Pacific Diamondback rattlesnake. That one's the one you scare your sister with. So that's, the gopher snake. So if you don't know the difference, you probably shouldn't be tromping around afterwards. The more you know, the safer you are. Some of the kids that are going to be using stuff, they have pill parties. They'll get pills out of your mom and dad's medicine cabinet, and we mix them up in a big bowl, and you just take whatever you take. Some people end up dead. Some people end up having hormone problems. There are people out there that use drugs on a regular basis that are responsible, that use them for their intended purpose, that they control their dosages and all that. That's really hard to believe for a lot of people out there, but think about yourself, think about the drugs that you use on a regular basis. If you're not an alcoholic and you drink alcohol responsibly, this is the same thing. You have a relationship with that substance that doesn't control your life. Some people, when it comes up above and beyond that, will have problems. Addiction, you got physiological addictions, you got psychological addictions. There's people that talk about being addicted to marijuana. Marijuana can be psychologically addictive. It's about as addictive as coffee and about as hard to kick. Has anybody stopped drinking coffee?
Yeah.
Okay, you get nervous, you get you know, your gut gets a little tight, you get anxious. That's marijuana come down. Where you have a physiological addiction like heroin, you can die from withdrawals. Alcohol withdrawal, sudden alcohol withdrawal can kill you. And so these are things that have been researched even further recently. So we're finding out the different levels. What we're putting out, well, not what we were putting out, but what law enforcement is putting out, legislature is putting out, is there's no difference between these two. It's all serious, it's all fatal, and that type of thing. So these attitudes inch their way into a lot of the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. You remember the Skinner box? You know, the little rat that had water and morphine laced water in the same cage, and the rat would eat the morphine until it died. What they didn't tell you about that, what they didn't know about that, is Norwegian rats are very social, and when you lock them in a confined space, they go nuts, and they will kill themselves. When Rat Park, this is the same guy that did the Skinner box, well, Alexander did what they call Rat Park, where they had this rat that was socialized, which was allowed to mate, which was allowed to play and eat food and all that. Almost never did the rat touch the morphine water, and they didn't have any drug problems or anything like that. The rats lived a long and happy life, and so, which is what they needed. Long story short, the opposite of addiction is connection. People that have jobs, people that have supportive families, they tend not to become addicted. We did a little experiment in Southeast Asia called the Vietnam War. A lot of guys came back addicted to heroin. The ones that came back to supportive environment could just set it aside, put it away. A big chunk of those people never went through withdrawals from the heroin use that they did in Southeast Asia. It's a pretty interesting research project. So the people that came back to it, they went from one hopeless environment to another, no job, living on the streets, that type of thing. Those are the people that basically give us the fantasy of the addicted Vietnam veteran kind of thing. So it's pretty interesting stuff. This has just come out in the last 5 years, which is really interesting. I do this trying to explain to kids that if you get up in the morning and you get ready to go to school and you forget your phone, what does that do to you? You're halfway down the block. I can't, a 16-year-old can't function. He just, he'll fall down and pee on himself. It's really bad. I actually brought him camping, and I brought him to a place that I knew for a fact there was no cell reception, and he was shaky by the time he got there. It was fun. You gotta do your experiments someplace. But that's the definition of the psychological addiction. You've got to have that thing in your pocket. You just don't feel right without it. So there's different types of drugs. I'll run through the different effects. We got depressant drugs. The classic one is alcohol. Xanax, Valium, any kind of benzodiazepine drug you're taking for mood elevation or anything like that. Those are in there. They slow the body down. They cause their own effects. Prescription mostly. You can buy a lot of those drugs like Xanax. We call them Xanny bars. This is a Xanny bar, and they're little 2 milligram things. You can break them and dose yourself up with them, which is kind of fun. White powder GHB. This is a popular date rape drug, so that falls into that category as well. Inhalant drugs like nitrous oxide, paint, glue, correction fluid is in there. This pretty much says it all. Some people like the metal flake paint because it gives them a different effect if you talk to these guys. And that's one of my favorite booking pictures. So, but yeah, he'd spray it in a bag and then would breathe the fumes from the bag. And that's basically, inflatable stupid right there. Nitrous oxide, I put that bottle there. A lot of stupid kids don't realize that there's medical grade nitrous oxide and automotive grade of nitrous oxide. The automotive grade can get you sick and can kill you just from the additives that are in there. So, and then this one, Ready Whip, is really good. If you turn the Ready Whip, if you don't turn the Ready Whip can upside down, you can get the gas out of it, which is medical grade. It's food grade, so it's better for you if you want to stop your breathing and all that. But all of that's out there, and some people, inhalant people, they do really weird things. They like the odor is the big attraction. I had one case where they thought it was a drug lab that caught fire, and all it was a guy had a roll of paper towels soaked in soap, and he put it in a little saucepan to boil, and then he would have that odor. And then throughout the house, he would have different things that smelled, and they thought it was a drug lab, and when it turned out to it, when I saw the booking picture, oh, this guy's on inhalants. And so that made it change the case of the case of the whole case. They had cops coming in and swearing it was a drug lab, and they just couldn't make it work all the way until you look at all the pictures.
Wait a minute. So if you've gone home repeatedly and the whipped cream in your refrigerator won't, you know, the cream's in there, it's full, but it won't come out?
Right.
Does that mean your kid is doing?
Drag Junior out in the backyard? Okay, I will say, that some of these things, they get drained off in the grocery store. So, but if it's a routine.
But it happens repeatedly.
Yeah, repeatedly, yeah, you gotta have a conversation. My
She's
kid,
lucky she's 28.
okay, and start looking for these things called whippets. You know, 28 has got another way of getting it. So. But yeah, my kids are screwed. They figured out. I have 16 and 19-year-old sons. That my oldest, you know, he's 19, going on lawyer. He likes to argue things with me. And I gave him a copy of the Constitution for his 18th birthday, and I go, "You're 237 years behind. Catch up." So my other son, he's so easy. He has like 15 different tells when I know he's lying. So I got him covered. He's a water polo player, so he's no problem right now. But yeah, my 19-year-old's friends, you know, they'll be sitting on my couch like, you, and you quit smoking weed before you come to my house. Got them scared anyway, so that's it. Dissociative anesthetics, PCP, ketamine, dextromethorphan, there's your cough syrup. This stuff exists out there. Once again, more white powders. I keep having white powders in here, which is an indication you never know actually what you're going to get when it's a white powder. But PCP is making a comeback. The dosages are lower. People are getting mellow on it. It's not the naked guy running down the street with an axe in his hand anymore. It's somebody sitting off in the corner with a different dose profile now. So it's out there. A lot of people are using that. Some of the people that use these kind of drugs like the fact that their brain, it's like a circuit breaker for your brain. These people black out and they don't remember hours and hours of all the fun stuff that they do. Their friends do, which is kind of the opposite. So, then we get to cannabis, marijuana products. Real big right now. A lot of, like I talked about the Tulare County thing. They had the parents they were both medical marijuana patients. They had 12 plants, which is well within the legal amount and all that kind of stuff. And some children's services worker decided that this was a danger for the kids. Marijuana plants. There's never been a recorded overdose of marijuana. Quoting Willie Nelson, the only way you can overdose on marijuana is if you stand underneath an airplane that throws a 1,500-pound bale out the window. So that's pretty much it. No recorded overdoses. You can eat the plant. Children can eat the plant. It's not going to make them sick and die. Nobody's going to die from this stuff. It's about as dangerous as a tomato plant. So if you've got tomato plants in the backyard, great, if that's what you're worried about. The chemicals used to grow it, some of the chemicals can be toxic in certain amounts. So if you have a situation where there's a marijuana grow in the house, if it's not secure and the kids have access to some of the chemicals, okay, great. The same thing should apply to someone who's growing tomatoes because the chemicals are about the same. But nobody's going to die as far as eating the plant or that type of thing.
Does it specify to them?
Oh yeah, every time. I've done it a few times.
What about wax?
We're getting into that. They're not going to kill anybody at all. Everybody's heard of dabbing?
Yeah.
This is a dab rig. It's a dab, D-A-B. They call this a dab rig. It's like a bong, but it's different. Well, it's the same kind of thing, but it's got a different attachment. This is a metal plate, and you take the wax on here, and then melt it on here, and then you'll get a. Well, this stuff is 15%. This stuff is probably 70%. So it's a lot more intense. You use a lot less, lot more intense. People are getting about as high as they did using less substance. So it's not like, you know, this is like a number 10 high as opposed to a number 2, you know, with earth. So there's a lot of that, a lot of the discussion going on. This stuff is incredibly potent. I photographed a jar of oil that was 90% pure, and it was a special, it's a CO2 process, and very, very high functioning device that makes it. That's about $65,000 worth of oil, and so when you get up to that level. This stuff, the average is about 15% THC, so it's higher than what used to be a few years back, but we'll have.
One quick moment.
Sure. Any questions meanwhile?
Sure, I have a couple. What is the difference between breath, blood, and urine alcohol levels? Do they all read the same? Is it all?
Okay, we're there. What happened?
Great. The blood alcohol levels are true, okay? Breath alcohol levels are a breath sample run through a computer, run through an algorithm to calculate the blood alcohol level. And so there's always something lost in the translation. You'll have, there's other tests that are out there. Urine is the same thing. What ends up in the urine goes through another algorithm to compute what the blood level actually is.
But does one tend to be higher and one tend to be lower?
Urine levels are less accurate. Breath levels are a little more accurate than urine levels, and blood, of course, are the most accurate because it's a direct result. So you'll see that when you have different types of things, like even a PASS device, the preliminary alcohol screening device. Those aren't as reliable as the ECIR machines because their calibration is a little bit different, and it's really subtle at that point. Some of the new PASS devices are really accurate. In some jurisdictions, not necessarily in California, but some jurisdictions are allowing them as a forensic result. So you've got to, depending on the judge and depending on the jurisdiction, sometimes that result can be argued. Other times the judges are going to say, no, it's good enough for our work. Yeah.
On the urine test for alcohol, when it says glucose or negative for glucose, what's the difference?
Some will do the glucose testing because if you have a diabetic, I'm a diabetic, and so I could have a diabetic reaction and look like I'm drunk. And so they'll test, some labs will test for glucose just to remove that argument that I was acting unsteady because my blood sugar was off. And sometimes they'll just test for glucose right away because it's a cheap and easy test. So, yeah.
I'm curious about what you're saying about the urine test. So I have two questions. Question one is, are you specifically stating that about multi-spectrum gas chromatography? Or are you talking about the just in the field dipstick test?
Well, the urine sampling is not GC mass spec. They're doing an immunoassay, which is a different test than the GC mass spec.
No,
if you have
the
a blood
department,
sample,
they're doing gas chromatography. Multi-spectrum gas chromatography is the gold standard that Pacific Tox uses on most of our tests.
oh, okay. The PAC toxins will do that. They'll
That's
get the same result. The only thing they're going to get out of a urine test is the metabolite. And so you'll get a really accurate level of the metabolite, which doesn't say anything about current intoxication. So what you're getting is leftover of use, which if it's marijuana, it could be a week old. In some cases, it could be a month old.
Well, unfortunately for us, if it's a week old, it's not necessarily marijuana, but if we're looking at methamphetamine or anything, probably a week might be current enough for a court to sustain. So I'm concerned about what you're saying as to the reliability of multi-spectrum gas chromatography, since that is what is tested, that's the method that our clients are tested. That's one question. And the second question that I have is when you testify, you're not a toxicologist, is that correct?
No, and I've actually got through Metro Court had a 70-page motion to keep me off the stand from testifying to stuff exactly like this. The quick and dirty explanation is everybody in here is a licensed driver. We all know how to read a speedometer. And we make our decisions on our driving behaviors based on what we read off that speedometer. I'm not an engineer. I can't build a speedometer, but I can read one. And with my experience of dealing with hundreds of these cases, I review toxicology results on almost every single one except for refusals, obviously, or where somebody wasn't able to do it. And so I've testified to particular levels. I've done wet labs where, especially with alcohol, I've done wet labs where I've correlated blood alcohol concentrations to actual field sobriety test behaviors, and then of course field reviews and all that. I've been allowed to testify in San Diego and Orange and LA County on that because I've had that same challenge pop up. They'll allow it to a certain extent, which is good. What I testify to is the same thing that LA County Crime Lab's going to testify to. Steve Klein and all those people that are at the crime lab, they're scientists, and they're not going to stick their neck out for anybody making stuff up. Cops, on the other hand, they don't know enough about the science to where they start rambling on about studies that they read back in the 1970s, and it gets crazy at that point. So when you have an officer stepping outside their expertise, and I'm really careful not to, and I actually tell people that I won't, but I will make a comment on certain levels that I know for a fact are either low or high, and that's basically all it is. Prescription medications, all those therapeutic ranges are published, so I've testified to those. As far as how somebody gets there and all the toxicology, won't do that. And hopefully you won't allow a toxicologist to testify as a street drug expert because they're not qualified. I had one from Orange County, Glendale PD contracts with Orange County Crime Lab to do all of their testing. And those guys want to keep this contract, and they've been notorious for taking a couple of leaps and bounds way outside their expertise. And we had one guy, actually the comeback so Mr. Morrow he's watched every episode of NCIS, he's seen a couple of YouTube videos, and he's followed you around in your lab for a couple of days, so he should be able to testify to your expertise. Is that correct? Oh, no, not at all. Then how can you do the same thing with him? You've never taken anybody to jail, you've never done a field sobriety test. So there's arguments on both sides of that. But they'll let me get in the ballpark, and then a lot of the times when I get in the ballpark and they'll try to confirm it with a toxicologist, they basically agree that there's no way to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt of this or that, or how long it stays in the system and things like all the common stuff that I'll testify to. So vape pens with marijuana. A lot of oils will go into vape pens. People are using those on a regular basis. Drives cops crazy because you see smoke billowing out the window of a car, and a lot of times it has nothing to do with marijuana. Stimulant drugs, cocaine, methamphetamine, the typical meth pipe, which is great, meth, more white powder, crack cocaine, a crack pipe. Crack pipes are different than meth pipes, so just in case. I want to keep you straight. You don't want to look bad at the party. Different coloring for meth. Some people, my son keeps asking me if I know anything about Heisenberg blue, and it's like, it's a TV show. Stop it. I actually had a picture of my wife does a lot of botanical stuff, and so I had a picture of menthol that she was doing, and she had it on the table for some concoction she was making. I'm like, that looks like crystal meth. And I actually took a picture of it and made it look like an evidence picture, and I've shown it to cops, and it fools them every single time. So nobody's that sharp. Faces of Meth, another thing to scare the kids. This is a great program where, Multnomah County up in Oregon, I believe, they're booking people, notice the same people coming in over and over again, and over a period of time they noticed these people were deteriorating, 4.5 years later, from May to November in the same year, just the methamphetamine use just tears these people to shreds. So that's a good thing. Faces of Meth, it's online if you want to scare your kids on it. Hallucinogens are alive and well. Ecstasy, LSD is coming back. Similar drugs, that type of thing. You'll see a whole bunch of different stuff. Peyote and mescaline, or mescaline powder, LSD in the powder form. tablet form, the typical blotter type stuff. Ecstasy is out there. The formulations of ecstasy are changing over a period of time, and there's a lot of overdose deaths as a result of poorly produced drugs. So they're working their way into the culture. We're talking about opiates, heroin, Vicodin, prescription medication, that type of thing. Once again, that's going to be Mexican brown heroin powder. That's black tar heroin, Mexico usually, and then of course China white, which is out there. Smoking, injected, nasal. You can use it a whole bunch of fun ways, and some fun ways you don't even want to know about. Right now, a lot of the overdose deaths are huge. Naloxone, which is a overdose reversing drug. Sometimes if you have a client, the parents are opiate users, maybe suggest to the court that they that they get a chance to have that with them to save their life if necessary. This guy's on a bus, and it just takes a matter of seconds before it takes effect. And you can just see the look in his face. He's, seconds after he's injected, his eyes are already twisting. And this is probably 2 minutes after that, and he completely falls out.
Jesus Christ.
Wow.
On a city bus. Wow. The happy ending to this story, well, I don't know, not happy for him, is that police show up right away. They give him a dose of naloxone. This particular department has Narcan naloxone. And they gave him a dose of it, and he gets up and walks away to jail. So, of course, these people are clapping for him. Hey, you're alive. I train people how to do this. I go to Santa Ana and I train the homeless heroin addicts how to use naloxone. We equip them with it. We give it to them. I had the opportunity to use it once, and you go from on death's door to sober in a matter of seconds. And so, like, I hit somebody with naloxone, he wakes up, and like 2 seconds later, he's punching me in the face, which is, okay, great, you win. But it works really well. It's amazing. So there's different things. I just want to bring this out just so you know a little bit about it, know how well it works, and how you can be wrong and hit somebody with it, and it's not going to hurt anybody. So there's a lot of overdose awareness that's going on these days. So. Cigarettes with vape pens, e-cigs, that's mostly for the kids. The reason why it smokes up so much is it has antifreeze in it, the same chemical in antifreeze. That's what gives it the smoke. So we're going to find out just what kind of lung damage that these things do over a period of time. Discussion of drug legalization. I used my Jetsons thing. I was a Jetsons kid. My dad worked in the space program. I was promised flying cars. God damn it, and they never got flying cars. So I learned how to be a pilot, got my pilot's license, and through that process of learning and doing all the things I needed to do, I found out that certain people should not be in an airplane. And so, same thing, we can't just legalize all drugs, we can't just throw the door open. There's got to be responsible regulation and that kind of thing, but we got to decide who decides. A lot of the stuff that we have here is, we have a public health crisis with drugs. We don't have a law enforcement problem. Unfortunately, law enforcement is thrown into there. You've got handcuffs and big cement boxes to throw people in. That doesn't solve the problem. That just prolongs it. So there's a lot of that back and forth. California's been trying for per se limits on marijuana without good science, without good research, and every time one of those bills comes up, somebody like me or somebody who's the Drug Policy Alliance or other drug policy people get involved in going to those people and telling them about the science and telling them about the policies that they probably should adopt. Of course, what about the kids? One of my favorite things is, if you're ever looking for the kid that's going to go to jail, which kid goes to jail? It's a very unfair, very racially motivated question. But statistically, it's the black male every single time, 25 times more than the white kid on the end. There's something wrong with that. Every one of these kids uses drugs, buys drugs, sells drugs at the same rate. Okay, there's no such thing as a typical drug user. There's no such thing as a good kid or a bad kid. All of this figures into it. These kids will also have parents that might be drug users. And so when this is not something that a toddler needs to experience. This kid was stripped down. There was a meth lab. They stripped him down, took his clothes, put him in one of the tie-dye funny suits, and got him out of there to be basically medically evaluated, taken from the parents and all that. So there's a lot of that. The exposure, the environment, the trauma that deals with that. We need to address real dangers. That's something that needs to go through our thought processes. Are the kids' needs being met? You might have crummy parents, but your needs are being met. But especially with what you guys do, you're going to bat for the kids. So you've got to make those decisions on how it needs to be approached. So statistics don't be one. Like I said, I flew through all this stuff. Any of the questions you guys have, please, if we have time for any questions, yeah.
Yeah. Any credible studies on the effect of marijuana on fetuses?
Nothing that's really on point, like with alcohol or with stimulants or anything like that. Some of the studies that are coming out of National Institutes of Health have got some studies, but the problem with NIH is that their studies are academic studies, and so they give you a piece of the puzzle. So there's no conclusive studies that are out there. There's some anecdotal stuff about low birth weight. Some of the Dunedin study that they did in New Zealand. New Zealand's great. They got every 3-year-old in this one town and tested every 3-year-old in that town. And then they've been testing every 8 years, I think, for the last 37 years. And so a lot of the results in there, they're just anecdotally about some lower birth weight, that type of thing. But that's, and then they talked about some psychological issues and some IQ issues as well. But when you balance it for all the other factors, there's really not a huge problem with that.
And you talked about addiction versus connection, like that people who are well connected, supportive families often are not addicts. Does that mean that you're able to put together a profile of someone who, despite a unique or some sporadic drug use, does not fit a profile of an addict or an abuser?
Well, it's I get the simple definition of addiction is use despite negative consequences, and so that's the simple one that's in the DSM-4. I think they're in 5 now, but that's the simple definition of addiction. So you have to identify the negative consequences. If somebody has got a baggie of weed in their room and is a straight A student, really is that an addictive kind of cycle? Yeah, he likes to smoke weed, but is that affecting lives and relationships and that kind of deal? And so a lot of the assumptions is we're on the biggest problems we have is with the alcohol model. And so we figure if you use a drug, you're automatically misusing it, or you're automatically addicted, or you automatically have a problem with it, which is sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. And so a lot of the circumstances to lay out whether or not this person has problematic drug use, sometimes that has to be with an interview. I've done those for some of the cases that I've been involved in, where I'll go visit the guy in the jail. When did you start, smoking weed? When did you start doing heroin? How long? If you lost jobs, you lost family connections, that kind of thing. And so I do the same thing that a social worker would do, but it's just a little bit more in depth on the drug use kind of thing. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about methadone? We're still getting petitions filed where they're alleging that the parents are methadone users.
If methadone is used as it's intended, which means a replacement for heroin or any other kind of opiate, methadone, the maintenance can be a good thing. A lot of the times, heroin users will get, and this is the interesting thing about opiates, is that one opiate can satisfy another opiate. So if you're a heroin user and you can't get heroin, you can take Vicodin, or you can take methadone to keep you from having those very, very uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. And so if the person is shown that they use methadone and they're going by the doctor's game plan, then yeah, there can be a good resolution there. But sometimes people chip with methadone to be able to save money on heroin type of thing. So,
But I'm sorry, just to follow up, is there any evidence that if a person is using methadone under doctor's advisements, that they would be getting high, or is it generally that they're just maintaining?
If their dosage level is dialed in, they're not getting high. They're not incapable of conducting their lives. There are people that are on methadone that are working jobs and have responsibilities. So if they're meeting their responsibilities and they're maintaining their level and they have good communication with their doctors or their care team, or however they're being processed, that's you've got to basically prove harm on top of that. So, yeah.
Is there a reasonable length of time for methadone maintenance that a parent should or a person should be on it? Like if a parent is using it I have a case where a mom was using it for 1.5 years, and so the department had a huge issue with that. So they're like, well, she's just getting high, Is
And
there,
that's when you got to get you can't just rely on the parent at that point. You don't just buy methadone. It's got to be given to you.
Right.
Well, I'll back up. You can buy it on the street, but for a legitimate methadone program, it's overseen by a doctor. There's reports. There's all that stuff, and so maybe do an SVT to the doctor who's maintaining her on methadone. Great, but if not, then that is a long time to be on a maintenance program. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. One, piggybacking off the marijuana usage and fetuses. Are there any reliable studies about marijuana usage and breastfeeding, and whether that can or can't be done? And then the second question is whether you know anything about the appropriateness of a person using marijuana as an alternative pain management treatment when they have a history of opioid dependency.
Okay, the breastfeeding thing, I don't have a clear answer on that. I know that some cannabinoids can pass through into that blood barrier and get into breast milk and that kind of thing. Whether or not it affects the fetus, a whole nother ball game on that. That's a really specific thing. I can try to get that answer. As far as the opiate, the latest, greatest science on opiate dependence, especially or marijuana use with opiate dependence, is let's say that your level of opiate use is approaching the max, the fatal level. Using marijuana with opiates doubles the analgesia, which the pain killing, and cuts the dose in half. So now you're way away from that fatal dose, and now the marijuana is working with they're different receptors, and it works better. The last conference I went to, they called it an exit drug now, where they're using marijuana to help reduce the amount of opiate that somebody might use. So there's new stuff out on that all the time. But it's shown very positive that it lowers the amount of opiates that needed to be to get rid of the same amount of pain. And so the marijuana, you can't overdose on it. It doesn't increase, like if you have opiates and you take Valium on top of that, yeah, you can have a problem. You can double yourself up into a fatal overdose. So it's interesting stuff that's out there now. So new and exciting, yeah.
We have 2 Lancaster questions. The first is whether or not gestational diabetes can cause a positive test for alcohol. And the second is, can secondhand pot smoke, would there be a measurable THC level?
Okay, so the gestational diabetes, I love that one. Alcohol is alcohol, blood sugar is blood sugar. And so it's not gonna, I mean, it's a nice dodge. I would say hell no. But that's just my professional opinion. But it's a good start. You can say that you have gestational diabetes, and then if the reason they want to test you is based on your behavior. Having a very high blood sugar can produce symptoms of being drunk, but you're not going to come up with a BAC. That's the big key thing. That if this person's acting drunk and has no BAC, there's something else causing it. So if a cop or a fireman or paramedics find somebody in the field that's acting drunk, that even smells a little bit, because when you have the ketoacidosis with diabetes, you're going to get a sweet smell to the breath, and that's just basically muscle tissue burning up, and you're off-gassing that. Sometimes cops get fooled by that. They have, well, you're drinking some sweet alcohol, but now that we have pass devices and all that, we can separate the two individually. What was the second one?
The second one is whether or not secondhand pot smoke, would there be a measurable THC level on the test?
Normally, no. If you're hotboxing with your friends in a car and you're not smoking, but you're inhaling a combined amount, if you're sitting in a closet with a friend who's smoking weed, yeah, you can have a measurable amount show up in the system. The 5 nanogram per milliliter per se level that other states have, like Washington and Colorado, that level is based on the fact of completely blowing away the secondhand smoke defense in like a DUI or under the influence kind of thing. But it's not likely to produce a significant, one-time exposure, a significant THC level. Yeah.
The cutoff levels for pack talks for marijuana is 50 mgs. So you said the per se level is 5. Could it be over?
Well, that's 50 nanograms per milliliter of carboxy THC. Carboxy THC is the metabolite of marijuana use. Actual THC that exists only in the blood, that's their, if they were to do, if they were to do GCMS testing, they'll test down to 1 nanogram per milliliter on that. But with the urine samples that are out there, 50 is the level of metabolites that they'll go at. So anything below that, they're going to call it negative.
Does that vary? So, I had read something that, like in the military, they have a different level that they use.
Yeah, the military 15.
Yeah.
Lower than that. The Olympic Committee, 150.
Right.
NFL, 35 nanograms per milliliter, so you can actually smoke a joint in the locker room and go out and play football. So whatever works. But they have a different strategy. It's not a law enforcement strategy. It's a player safety strategy. So there's different levels that all depend. So, yeah.
Can you actually, specifically with regard to marijuana, ascertain from a physical toxicology urine test by looking at the levels, anything about a person's usage, when they use, how often they use?
I've seen pack tox levels for urine go from 0, 30, 80, 900, 1,000, and there's nothing that you can lay out. Somebody who has 1,000 nanograms of metabolite smokes a lot of weed, but when, how much, how high they were at the time, there's no backwards extrapolation. Like if you have a, 0.15 blood alcohol, you basically know that there's a burn-off rate of 0.012 to 0.015% per hour. And so that's the range. And so that's for alcohol, because alcohol has a linear burn-off rate. And so it works for most people. It's really pretty accurate. For marijuana, it's all over the place. It's erratic. Sometimes some people hang on to it. Some people will go to 0, and without any further use, they'll pop back up to 5 2 days later. And because it goes into the fatty tissue, not into into the blood. So it's not burn off as quick. Yeah.
Have you testified kind of on that issue in correlating behavior to level where a person is a constant smoker, so that if the amount of marijuana they're taking on a daily basis is the same, they're maintaining, and in fact, their behavior, they're not going to have erratic behavior. It may look like they're positive and at a very high level, but their behavior is very manageable because they're consistently taking a certain amount of marijuana on a daily basis.
Yeah, and that's tolerance. Somebody who would, like, if you take that same person, this guy uses a gram of marijuana 3 times a day, that's a lot of marijuana for one person. If you or I were to do that with no experience, we'd be flat on our butt watching Beavis and Butthead reruns. But that person goes to work, at the hospital as a trauma surgeon, and he's fine. So they walk amongst us, trust me. So yeah, it's amazing when you go to some of these events, you see people that you see in different circumstances. But yeah, that's a tolerance issue, and if that person stopped using for a couple of weeks, the dose that would get them the same effect would be much less. And so that's pretty common. Yeah.
If the levels on, say, specific toxicology tests aren't a good indication of actual intoxication, which I think is kind of what Marlon was getting at, what is?
Blood. well, actually, blood is a better representation. If you have somebody who's a 35 nanograms, you can basically say that that person has used a significant amount contemporaneously to that test. So you would have, because the blood values come down rather quickly. When you smoke marijuana, you go from 0 to 150 nanograms per milliliter within 20 or 30 minutes. And then it rapidly drops off over the next hour or so to below 10. And then it'll zero out hours later. That's just a single use. But somebody who uses a lot more, that profile will extend further. So they'll have a higher level upon recovery.
So it sounds like the blood would give you a better indication of how much was used and when. Would it tell you anything about the person's actual behavior, their symptoms of intoxication, or would you have the same tolerance issue?
You'd have the same tolerance issue. There are 250 different strains, at least 250 different strains of marijuana that do probably 3 different symptom profiles: stimulant, depressant, or even hallucinogen. It makes. I got in trouble in Long Beach court they asked me what the worst symptom of marijuana intoxication is, and I said it makes Grateful Dead music sound good. And even the judge laughed, so it was great. So he had a good laugh. Okay, get back to it, be serious. But that's really true. It depends on the strain. It depends on the type of use. Somebody who eats marijuana, their symptom profile goes different than that. It goes a lot longer with a lot lower intoxication. So. And experience matters a whole lot with that. So,
would you have a suggestion about how to present something like that to the court? Like what kind of test could be run, or would you be able to testify about something like that, say from meeting with one of our clients or observing them, their functionality?
Yeah, if somebody's a constant user, like everyday medical user, they're going to have a tolerance to where they're going to use to a level that satisfies their need for daily activity. If their goal is to get high, then yeah, they're going to be less functional. If their goal is to relieve anxiety or relieve pain, then they'll use up to that level when it's not cost effective to basically hammer yourself every day on it. So, but if that's their goal, then they're going to be less functional on a regular basis. So, yeah.
A really nice question. Will hemp tea cause positive tox or THC?
Well, what?
Hemp, actual real live hemp should be such a low level of THC. I think officially it has to be 0.3% and below to be actual real live hemp. So if they do get a positive, if they're talking about drinking hemp tea, they should probably bring a sample of it in. So, but it shouldn't really hit you up to that level. There are high CBD, very, very low THC hemp strains that have medical benefits that shouldn't cause intoxication.
Nick will stick around for a while. I know several of you have to get back to court, so those of you who don't have to go back to court and have more questions, you can stay. He will be here. He will answer all your questions. We'll put his CV up on the later website. So if you want to stick around, but I see people kind of rustling. I know people have to get back. So thank you so much, Nick.
Appreciate it. You guys have I'm not one of those experts that makes you swipe a credit card before I answer the phone. I hate those guys. If you got a question on a case, give me a call. If I can answer your question, I will. If I don't know the answer,